This is also a time of change for my family.
Was Charles right to stay silent for so many years? Protection or cowardice? Tell us below when you hear it all. So, 3 days ago, something happened inside Buckingham Palace that Britain had never seen before and may never see again. There was no press conference, no carefully timed media strategy, no statement drafted over 3 days by a team of communications advisors. Just one man, in a low but unusually firm voice, delivering a single sentence to the Royal Council that dismantled 30 years of history in under 10 seconds. King Charles III declared before the assembled council that he was divorcing Camilla Parker Bowles and stripping her of every royal role she held. The room went silent. Then Britain went loud. What the headlines could not tell you, because nobody outside those palace walls knew it yet, was that this decision did not begin 3 days ago. It began nearly a month earlier, in the small hours of the morning, with a locked chapel door, an old wooden box, and a stack of letters that were never supposed to exist. The palace staff noticed the change first. King Charles had always been a man of almost mechanical routine: early dinners, strict schedules, lights out by a predictable hour. So when he began slipping out of his private bedroom in the dead of night, somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, the disruption was impossible to ignore. No bodyguard, no notification to staff, just footsteps in an empty corridor, moving always in the same direction, toward the small private chapel located deep within the palace's restricted wing, a space rarely used and rarely spoken about. When he returned, his face told a story his voice never would. This was not the expression of a man who had been praying. The tension sat differently. Among the staff who noticed, one man paid closer attention than the rest. Thomas Hargrove had served the royal family for over 20 years. He was not the kind of man who interfered. In 2 decades, he had seen things he had quietly chosen not to see, heard things he had chosen not to hear, because discretion was not just his professional obligation, it was his identity. But the 4th consecutive night broke something in him. Because the look in the king's eyes when he returned from the chapel was not the look of a private man in private grief. It was the look of genuine fear. Thomas waited until William appeared alone in the rear garden the following morning, a quiet corner the family used precisely because it was away from everything. He approached with a voice that was trembling but decided, and he said words that took more courage than anything else in his 20 years of service. He told the prince about the nightly disappearances, about the chapel, about the box he had seen through the gap in the door, the trembling hands, the letters held under candlelight. He told William he believed the king was not merely carrying stress. He was carrying a secret with real weight. William went still. 2 questions, delivered in a voice kept deliberately low. Then a long silence. Then a hand placed on Thomas's shoulder, and a promise that this would stay between the 2 of them. What followed was a week that William would spend watching his father with entirely new eyes. And once he knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. Meetings where Charles drifted mid-sentence, his gaze sliding to somewhere the room couldn't see. Fingers tapping arrhythmically on conference tables. Answers to advisors that were technically words, but carried no conviction behind. After 7 days, William was done waiting. He found Thomas in a corridor with no cameras, his voice low and fully decided. He needed to know what was in that box. Thomas hesitated for exactly as long as it took to look into the prince's face and understand that hesitation was no longer a reasonable option. He nodded. That night, they went in. The chapel was cold in the way that rooms feel cold when they have been holding silence for a long time. A few electric candles cast light that barely reached the walls. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly sweet, incense that had been burned long ago and never quite left. They searched carefully, William moving along the walls while Thomas checked the altar and its surroundings. It took only minutes. Thomas whispered from the corner and William crossed the room to find the wooden box hidden behind a small statue, tucked into the shadow as though placed there by someone who hoped darkness itself would keep the secret. The box had no lock. Just a plain wooden lid and the weight of whatever was inside. William opened it. A thick stack of letters, all addressed by hand to King Charles, no sender name anywhere, no postmark that identified an origin. He sat down on the nearest chair and began to read. The first letter stopped him cold. Its content was specific and detailed in the way that only first-hand witness accounts are specific. It described a private meeting, secretly arranged in a quiet house deep in the countryside, far from London and every watching eye. A meeting between Camilla Parker Bowles and Princess Diana, held in the aftermath of the affair becoming public knowledge. What the letter described happening in that room made William's fists close until his knuckles changed color. He kept reading. The second letter. The third. Each one adding more detail, more texture, more of the conversation that had taken place in that room between two women, one of whom had never told a single. To understand what those letters described, you have to go back. The autumn the affair became public was the autumn Britain's relationship with the monarchy cracked in a way it had never cracked before. The press was relentless. Public anger was genuine. And Diana, the woman the world had adopted as its own, stood at the center of it all, absorbing everything while the institution around her offered nothing in the way of shelter. Camilla understood her position clearly. Inaction would leave her permanently exposed, permanently on the outside of a family she had no official standing in. After days of consideration, she made a decision that nobody in the royal family ever knew about. She arranged a private meeting with Diana. Not to apologize. Not to seek peace. To draw a line in the clearest possible terms about who stood where and why. The house was a friend's property in the quiet countryside, the kind of place where nothing gets photographed and nobody asks questions. Diana arrived looking the way she had looked for weeks, worn down but still carrying herself with the particular grace that seemed to be the one thing nobody could take from her. She had already endured the worst stretch of her life. She was walking into a room she didn't know would make it worse. Camilla opened the conversation with the kind of directness that doesn't leave room for softening. Charles had never truly belonged to Diana, she said. He had loved Camilla for a very long time. Diana's role had been a performance required by the institution, a beautiful figure to stand beside the heir and produce children, and that performance had now run its course. The sensible thing, the merciful thing for everyone involved, would be to stop making the situation more complicated than it needed to be. Diana was making everything harder. For everyone. Diana sat and listened with her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt. She tried to respond, quietly, that she had never intended to stand in anyone's way. That she had only ever wanted something genuine. Camilla moved closer. Her voice dropped in a way that somehow made the words land harder rather than softer. Within the royal family, she told Diana, there had never been a place for her that was truly her own. The family had needed an heir and a public image. She had provided both. But the woman Charles needed beside him, the one who understood him completely, had always been Camilla. It was time to stop performing grief for public cameras. It was time to accept what had always been true and remove herself from a situation where her presence served no one. Diana did not cry audibly. She understood that tears would become evidence of instability, ammunition to be used later. She sat and took every word, and when it was over she stood and left. She said nothing to anyone in the royal family. She would not give the situation another scene to absorb. Instead, she told the only person she trusted completely, her private psychologist, and she told him everything. What nobody in that room realized, not Camilla, not Diana, was that they were not alone. A servant named Margaret Ellis had remained in the adjacent room to finish her cleaning. She heard every word through the wall, every sentence of Camilla's deliberate demolition of a woman who was already on her knees. Margaret was so stunned she couldn't move. She finished her work in silence, gathered her things, and carried what she had heard out of that house like a stone she had no idea she would spend the next 3 decades unable to put down. Margaret left her position eventually. The weight of what she knew and what she had chosen to keep quiet followed her into every year that came after. The conscience does not negotiate with time the way we hope it will. As decades passed and Diana's story became the world's story, the gap between what Margaret knew and what the world was allowed to know eventually, it became unbearable. She could not go to the press. The risk was too great, and the newspapers were not where this truth belonged. She could not go to the palace officially, so she did the only thing that felt both honest and survivable. She wrote the letters. Anonymous, handwritten, addressed directly to King Charles. She sent them one by one, each one adding detail, each one pressing the truth closer to the surface. She had no way of knowing whether Charles would act on them or lock them in a box in a chapel and spend his nights staring at them in the dark. As it turned out, he did both. William did not stop at the chapel. He went looking for Margaret. An address in the corner of one envelope, barely visible, gave him a starting point. With Thomas as his only trusted partner and no official channels involved, he traced her to a modest house in the southern suburbs of London. Security camera footage from a nearby post office confirmed the identification. But when they arrived at the address, the neighbors delivered the news he had feared. Margaret had moved less than a week earlier. No forwarding address. No explanation. Someone had reached her. The conversation was short. Camilla offered money, enough for a comfortable life, no questions, complete disappearance. Margaret's response arrived after a long pause that told Camilla everything before the words did. She said she could no longer carry it. She said she wanted the truth out. The call ended. Camilla sat in her private room with the phone still in her hand, and the cold realization settling over her that she had just made the evidence stronger. Margaret had confirmed on an unsecured call that she was the sender of the letters. Every move Camilla had made to contain the situation had pushed it further beyond her control. William brought everything to his father the night before the council. The complete file laid on the desk between them, the letters, the psychologist's detailed notes, the recorded confirmation from Margaret's phone call. Charles read in silence, page by page, his face losing color in a way that made him look older with every paragraph. When he finally looked up, his voice was reduced to something barely above a whisper. He said he had never imagined it would go this far. He said he could no longer cover it. He would convene the emergency council in the morning. The conference room the following day held the kind of silence that rooms hold when everyone present understands they are inside a moment that will not be repeated. Senior royals, longtime advisors, key figures in the institution's structure, all of them present, none of them speaking until Charles entered and sat and immediately began. William stood and presented the evidence chain in full. The letters, the psychologist's notes, and Diana's signed confirmation. The audio recording of the phone call. The room absorbed it without a sound. Every eye went to Camilla. She sat with her face drained of everything except the effort of staying upright.